ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Sonya Voumard is an author and a former journalist. For many years, she wrote for the Melbourne Age, and this was in the 80s and the 90s, when the life of a journo involved a lot of caffeine and a lot of heavy drinking. Sonya noticed that she had a tremor in her hand, a tremor that was similar to the one she'd noticed in her father back when she was a kid. It was easy enough to put the tremor down to her work hard, play hard lifestyle. But over the years it got progressively worse. She spent years hiding the shaking or trying to distract people from the shaking. It kept her from eating at the table in front of other people, even if she was incredibly hungry. And then one day when Sonya was driving, her neck spasmed and snapped into place on a busy road. Well, after that, it was impossible to ignore. But it was only a few years ago that doctors finally diagnosed what was going on. And Sonya learned what was really happening inside her brain. Sonya has written a memoir called Tremor, a movement disorder in a disordered world. Hi, Sonya.
Hi, Richard. Great to be here.
You grew up in Melbourne. What was the family home like from your early memories?
I grew up in a suburb called Camberwell, which was very middle class. But
leafy is always the adjective attached to
leafy
Camberwell.
And conservative, and also dry, in the sense that there were no pubs there. But it was also a bit of a mixed suburb in the sense that the street that I grew up in had a Children's Salvation Army home across the road. So while we lived in this sort of conservative suburb, we had very mixed experiences in terms of the kids we mixed with and the things we got to see when we were kids.
How lively was the family home?
Very. My mother was a refugee from World War II Europe, and my father was a former journalist himself, had worked for United Press International, and was at that time working as the publicity officer for HSV7, as it was then known. And every Friday night, it was called Friday Night at the Brinsleys, Dad would bring home a bunch of crazy journos and TV people and newspaper people and whatever, and they would all sit by the fire at our place and drink and scream and laugh and talk and argue, and Mum would make some incredible sort of big European soup, and they would all, enjoy it thoroughly. And we would be, my sister and I, at that stage, there were only two of us, would be in our room trying to get to sleep while these adults were shouting and whatever. But we sort of liked it. There was something comforting about that.
Did you think at an early age that would be the life for you, that kind of journalistic life, talking to interesting people, arguing, chatting, debating things? Definitely,
yeah. I mean, that's what inspired me. I remember that we had, there was a fellow called Ray McMacken who was supposedly quite close physically to Senator Robert Kennedy when he was assassinated. And it sounds really weird now, but in those days, obviously, communications weren't as good and whatever. And HSV7 brought Ray McMacken out to interview him. And he came to our house and we took him to Healesville Sanctuary and showed him the kangaroos. All of this just seemed incredibly sort of exciting and colourful to me. And I knew fairly early on that I wanted to be a journalist.
Your dad knew the tricks of journalism, all the inside secrets of it, the craft of it. Did he tell you anything about the craft when you were little?
Yeah, well, I, of course, I was quite a fearful kid in some respects. I was very confident and cheeky, but I was also fearful that I might get kidnapped. And when the Faraday kidnapping happened in the early 1970s, it was a huge story, and it was my kind of story because of my preoccupations.
Sorry, you were preoccupied with kidnapping before this happened?
Yes, because of the Beaumont children. Those stories were so sort of strong in my fearscape. And I remember fighting with my sister. We shared a bedroom, and I would always want to lock the bedroom window, and she wouldn't, because I was worried that somebody would cut the fly wire open and take us in the night. But I think it was probably because I watched too many episodes of Homicide or something.
You're traumatised by Leonard Teal, were you?
Yeah, that's right. Alwyn Kurtz. So it was a fascinating story to me, the Faraday kidnapping story. And so I remember one Saturday just with Dad standing at the kitchen table. We used to get every newspaper delivered in those days. And we laid out the Sun, we laid out the Age, and we laid out the Australian. And we compared the coverage, and Dad spoke to me about headlines and background paragraphs and layout and all that sort of thing, and how, it was okay for headlines to be ungrammatical because they had to just tell the story straight away.
This is the 1970s, and so were there other thoughts preoccupying you about the state of the world that worried you as a kid?
I was very frightened about nuclear war. And I think because Mum came from a war situation, she was always talking about the war, and my grandparents were always talking about the war. So there was always in the back of my mind this idea of this very black stage that people were running across. And I felt like, yeah, the war. And if there'd been one war, why wouldn't there be another, especially when people kept talking about it?
So you're living in this lovely, leafy, comfortable suburb, this, where Barry Humphries grew up in. It's full of these nice suburban wealthy people, and nonetheless you had this real powerful sense of how tenuous it all was, fragile it all was. It could all sort of just go like that.
Yeah, I saw the darkness. I also had a very sort of comedic side to me where I would just be incredibly sort of ridiculous and silly and try and make my sister laugh a lot. But it was this nervous thing that I suppose flipped from one thing to another.
When do you remember noticing that your dad had a bit of a tremor in his hand?
I rocked up into the kitchen one morning and Dad was having breakfast and he cut the top off the boiled egg. And in those days he used to give us the white bit. And he'd cut it off on this occasion and handed it to me, and I noticed that his hand was shaking. And I thought, oh, he must be really busy. But that was really all I thought at that time.
And what kind of shake was it? Was it like a little tremor, or was it more of a trouble, like would he be spilling a glass of water if he was holding it?
No, he wouldn't have done that. It was just a little tremor, but I always noticed it.
Did you put it down to something, or you just thought this is how it is, or what?
I thought he was busy, and I knew that he had various things happen in his life. He suffered from TB as a young man. His sister became a paraplegic in a car accident in the 50s. And so there was also that kind of side to him that had its troubles. And I don't know, I don't think I thought it through. It was just something I absorbed.
So then 1975, your dad gets a posting to London and the whole family's going to London. Tell me what you remember of that move to London, Sonya.
Well, it was very exciting. Firstly, we got to spend a lot of time away from school because it took a lot of time to sort of uproot ourselves and go there. And then we spent quite a bit of time trying to find a house that we were going to live in. It was a very unsettling time for us as well because we were completely out of routine. We didn't really know where we were going to go to school. And at that stage, people were telling us that suburbs like Fulham, which is one of the ones that we were interested in looking at, kids brought knives to school. And this terrified me as well, given my predilection for fear. It was a very unsettled time.
And then that didn't happen. You didn't end up going to that school.
Well, Dad's job was Public Relations Officer Europe for Qantas, and one of the first things he had to do was go and meet a bunch of journalists who were arriving on what was then the inaugural flight to Belgrade that Qantas had set up this service.
In Yugoslavia, right.
In Yugoslavia.
Communist Yugoslavia.
The former Yugoslavia,
right,
yes. And Dad's best friend was a guy called John Marr, who was the news director at HSV7 at the time. And he was there, and the story was that Dad didn't turn up for a meeting, and somebody sort of said, you better go and check his room because it was quite late and unlike him. And they kind of broke into his room and he was found dead in bed. He'd died of a heart attack.
How old was he when he died?
44.
And how were you told back in London about your dad's death?
His boss was a man called Captain Lower. I don't know why he had that name, but it was always struck us as odd. Came to the door of the house that we were staying in with a woman and knocked on the door, and Mum sort of opened the door because we were all still in our pyjamas. It was quite early when I say early, it was about 9 or something. And Mum sort of half opened the door and said, oh, I think you've got the wrong house. And they said, no, we need to speak to you, Mrs. Voumard. And she said, well, it's not a good time. We're planning to go on a trip into London today, and look, I'd prefer if you came back later. No, we really need to speak to you. And she said, what is it? And they had really sort of stern looks on their faces, and Mum held her chest and said, it's my husband. And they sort of nodded solemnly, and Mum said, plane crash? And they said, no, look, I think we better come in. And anyway, Mum went into the lounge room with them. They told her. She then said, girls, I think you better come in, I've got something to tell you. I remember my older sister picked up my younger sister, who was then only 8 years old, and they were sitting on the couch, and Mum was just staring into space, and she said, Dad died last night. We just all started crying, and I became so sort of shaken up. Mum said to me, you go and have a bath, and which I did because I was sort of disruptively crying and stuff. And it was really weird because I was sitting there in this bath looking at my dad's aftershave and thinking, he's gone. I could still smell that aftershave, but he's gone.
You'd been doing all this catastrophic thinking as a little girl, and here's the catastrophe.
Exactly.
But it's not the end of the world, but it kind of is at the same time.
Yeah, well, it was a period of feeling very insecure. We were away from our family. The first thing we did was ring our relatives and friends back in Australia, and then Mum said, we'll need a flight back to Australia as soon as possible, and we need to get out of this house. I can't stay here. So they moved us into the Mayfair Hotel, into the presidential suite, and we basically stayed there until they could get us a flight for 5 of us in first class, because, you know, we really weren't fit to be in any less sort of, I suppose, cushioned comfort.
You said your mum is a war refugee. Do you think that's something to do with her unwillingness to even want to let those men into the house? Like that feeling of, you've clearly got some bad news and I just don't want to know about it. I don't want to hear what it is you're going to bring me. Do you think there was something in that? You know? Possibly.
She certainly had a fairly hairy escape with her family from Dystonia in 1944, I think it was, just when the country was falling to the Russians once and for all. So her family had some serious scrapes. You know, they were strafed by aircraft flying over looking for people trying to escape, and then she was on a boat to Germany, and there were 2 boats that left at the same time from this part of Estonia, and the other one got blown up and Mum's didn't. So I think what it did point to was that Mum did have post-traumatic stress syndrome, but she had made a world for herself with Dad and us, and that made her secure, and the minute that was threatened, I think a lot of that other stuff came flowing back. I just remember her staring into space a lot and crying, and each morning she would be literally ill, and that was very distressing for all of us. We couldn't get back into the house that we owned in Camberwell because it was rented out. So some very kind friends of Mum's lent us another house of theirs in Hawthorne, which we stayed in. And again, it was just a very unsettled period. All we wanted to do was get back into our own house, get back to school, get back to normal. And it was a very hard thing to do. And my sister and I joke about this, but Mum, who had always been somebody very sort of conscious of her appearance, very elegant dresser, she just wore one outfit for ages until my sister and I finally threw those clothes out.
What was the funeral like? Was it in Australia or in England?
It was in Australia. We couldn't get Dad's body back for weeks because there was a lot of bureaucracy. They insisted on doing, well, not insisted, they had to do a post-mortem because it was a sort of surprising death. So we had a memorial service at a church in Hawthorne, which was Dad's family church when he was growing up, even though he was an atheist. And it was, I just remember there being there were lots of people from the media and different, you know, and all our friends and so on. And I just remember thinking, I have to be really mature and sensible, and I have to smile but also look solemn. It was hard to know how to be.
How old were you? 9?
13.
13, okay. So you're there on the cusp of adolescence. And could you do that? Could you be that very good girl that you were expected to be, or felt you were expected to be?
Yes, I surprised myself. Yes, I could. Except that afterwards, when because we were prior to moving into the friend's house, we were staying at the Hilton when we first got back from England, and there was a big wake at the Hilton for my dad, and all these adults sort of crowded into the room, and I remember my sister and I in another room, separated from them, were smoking our heads off because there were no rules anymore.
Seriously, that's how you felt? There were no rules, like Dad's dead?
Yeah.
That's not right.
Yeah.
So it's like the world had broken its contract or something.
Yeah, there were no certainties. And even though Mum had always been the sort of, I suppose, the disciplinarian in a sense, Dad left a lot of that stuff to her. He was a very benevolent father, but he hated smoking. So it felt, I guess it was the first thing my sister and I wanted to do when he died, was to smoke.
What was family life like after that? Did it recover its joy, or was it there always just this awful pall after that?
It was both things. It was joyful, chaotic, amusing in many respects, but also often sad. My sister and I were hitting adolescence, and so we had a lot of people coming around to the house. And at that time as well, a lot of kids at schools' parents had broken up. So there were sort of quite a few orphans of these broken homes when people were just working out how to do this kind of thing. And so our house became a sort of a hangout place for a lot of lost kids. We would just put up a camp stretcher in one of our bedrooms, or someone would sleep on the couch. We'd play music really loudly, have the fire on. It was slightly anarchic, but it was also wonderful and warm and loving.
When did you start to notice you had a tremor just like your dad?
It was actually the year he died. I noticed as I was smoking at school down the back of the Oval, which we all did then, and my friends noticed it too, my hand would shake as I held the cigarette. And I thought this was pretty cool, actually, because it sort of hinted at a hard living lifestyle. And I didn't think much of it because it wasn't debilitating. It was more of a tic or something. And it wasn't the sort of thing people would make fun of you about or anything, because I could still hold a glass and eat my sandwiches and do all that stuff.
It made you look like a bohemian a bit, didn't it? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's what I was aiming for. I smoked a pipe at one point.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So you didn't try to hide it then. How are you going at school? Were you skipping school since there were no rules in the world anymore?
I skipped a lot of school, but it was also because I just couldn't really concentrate in the classroom. And also Mum liked having me around. So I would bring all my homework home and just hang out with Mum and lie on the ground doing my essays and doing my maths and whatever. And that sort of continued pretty much until I finished school. I just, not staying with Mum all the time, but I would just go to the library where I got more done than I got in class.
So how did you then go with your final HSC?
Reasonably well, considering. Some teachers didn't think I was going to pass because I'd attended so rarely.
You got a cadetship in journalism at the Herald Weekly Times as it was in those days. And from there you went on to work at the Melbourne Age. I'm just wondering, again, if you've got this tremor, that would have fit in quite well with that caffeine and booze-driven world. It's kind of not like journalism these days. Back then there was so much smoking and drinking.
There was. There were cigarette burns on the desks at the Melbourne Herald when I started as a cadet.
Do you remember like going out on a Saturday night in those days? You'd come home with your hair and clothes stinking of cigarette smoke, and it wasn't, I don't know, I can't even bear the thought of that now, but it didn't bother me that much back in the day.
Yeah, it was very de rigueur to smoke. Yeah, I loved it. I loved smoking. Luckily, I was able to give it up, but it was definitely all part of the persona.
So with that lifestyle that came with journalism in those days, all that drinking coffee, cigarettes, drinking coffee, cigarettes, how was your health going?
Pretty bad. In sort of patches, I ended up getting a very serious bout of tonsillitis, something called a quinsy, and I almost died when I was 19. Mum, luckily being a nurse, knew that I was heading downhill pretty quickly, and she forced a specialist to see me on a Friday afternoon, and he said, we need to get her into St Vincent straight away. And I was on antibiotic drips for a week and pethidine.
You've got your tremor and it's getting worse. Did you go to doctors and ask them about the tremor at this point?
I did. The tremor didn't really get super worse until I was in about my 30s. So the people I did ask about it were GPs, and they would say it's a familial tremor.
What does that mean?
It means that they run in families. It's also called essential tremor. So there are several different types of tremors.
Right. But given that your dad had a tremor,
yep,
you have a tremor, it's easy to call it a familial tremor.
Yeah, and the word was nothing much can be done about it. Nobody ever said, oh, you shouldn't drink coffee or you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that. They just said, you live with it. And I did.
Meanwhile, you're rising through the ranks as a journalist. You live in Brisbane to report on the Fitzgerald Royal Commission. Then you're posted to Canberra with the press gallery at Parliament House. And 1990, you're in Canberra, you're driving in the car one day. Tell me about this day.
So I was driving down what I now realise was Canberra Avenue, and I had a really great old blue Saab which, again, a bit of a fashion accessory in those days, and it was quite heavy steering. And all of a sudden, as I was turning to see if there was a car behind me, my neck seized up, and it was just excruciatingly painful. And I tried to react against it and bring it back, but couldn't.
How did it seize up? What do you mean by seizing up? What did it do?
It stayed in position while I was looking around to see if a car was behind me.
So you turned your head around to look to see if a car was behind you.
Yeah.
So what, you're looking over your shoulder.
Yes.
And it froze in that position?
Pretty much. Froze in the sense of it was so painful, it didn't want to move back.
So you can't move your head forward then?
I could, but it was excruciating, and I did. And the pain continued in sort of very intense form. And I got myself home, and I rang the office and said, look, I've just had this terrible neck seizure. I need to go to a physio or something. And I went to physios, I went to doctors, I went to all sorts of people, and they all said the x-rays showed nothing. Nobody had a clue what it was. They thought it was just, computer neck caused by the overuse of computers.
Did the pain go, or never quite go?
I had to take 2 weeks off work. I went down to see my old GP in Melbourne, and he did some exercises where he very slowly manoeuvred my neck from left to right, and he got me some more movement back, and that was the best it got. But in different circumstances, I constantly had this pulling of the neck that way.
So you mean like you were involuntarily turning to one side?
That's right.
Like turning to look over one shoulder?
Yeah. But I just put up with it because nobody could tell me what it was, and I would go to physios and they would knead my neck and my cervical spine, and it would feel fantastic while they were doing it, but then it would just go back to its former state almost straight away.
Were you self-medicating?
I was, yeah. I was taking a lot of painkillers and also, not missing the odd drink.
Not missing the odd drink, did that help?
Yes.
So in 91, you gave up the job in the press gallery and moved to Sydney as the bureau chief for The Age. And how did you meet your partner Judy while you were there?
People may remember a very much wilder than I journalist called Margot Kingston.
Oh, yeah.
And she had left The Age some months earlier to go and work as yarn events researcher. And she met Judy, who was then the yarn events main editor, on A Current Affair, which in those days wasn't quite as down market as it is now. In fact, it was quite upmarket. Bob Hawke would often go on it and talk about China and so on. So those two met, and Margot came to visit me in Sydney in my new digs, and she said, I'm going out to dinner at this really great friend's house. Do you want to come? And I said, yeah. I didn't have much to do because I didn't have a social circle in Sydney at that time. And so we caught a taxi over to Bondi, to this amazing apartment with a view all over Bondi Beach, and Judy was there with her then partner cooking up a piece of eye fillet.
Had you dated women before, or was she your first woman you ended up dating?
I had experiences with women before, but she was the first one who grabbed me by the heart, I guess.
Tell me about the lunch party you were invited to.
Oh, well, so yes, some weeks after that, I was invited to a lunch party at her place, and there were a whole lot of lesbians, Sydney groovy lesbians, all sort of dressed in their leathers and short hair, and I came from work, and they'd all been sort of drinking for a bit and had already had their lunch because I was late, and I couldn't pick up a glass because my hand was shaking so much, and so I sort of managed to. You learn strategies for these things. I sort of managed to kind of get it low down and then kind of quickly get a bit of wine into me until the tremor settled a bit. But the food had by that stage been cleared away and I was really starving. And so I went to the fridge surreptitiously, and there was some smoked salmon and some cream cheese in a separate bowl, and I grabbed a piece of smoked salmon and I dug it into the cream cheese and just ate it in the kitchen quickly, and then returned to the social gathering.
So you're gouging food out of the fridge rather than eat in front of it. Was that because you didn't want to eat in front of people, though? Was that part of it too?
That was one of the things, yes, yeah.
Did you confess to Judy that you'd done this?
Later, I said, that time I came over, did you ever notice that there was a big hole in the cream cheese? And she said, no, why? And I told her the story, and she just thought it was hilarious.
I think if I'd met you back in those days and I was, across the table from someone who wasn't eating and whose hand was shaking, I'd go, oh, yeah, that poor woman, she might be an alcoholic or she's got the DTs or something. Was that a mistake people often made?
I think so, yeah. And because I was a little bit of a wild child, people might have just thought that was a logical step.
It doesn't sound like you were that bothered by it, though, the way you're telling me now, or have I got that wrong? Am I misreading this? Were you bothered, not bothered? I'm not quite sure.
I wasn't bothered until much later, I think it's fair to say. I mean, look, I was bothered.
Sorry, even after you in traffic, your whole neck had gone like 90 degrees on you in the middle while driving a car?
Well, you see, the neck was separate from the shaking fingers. Nobody ever thought that those two things were connected.
Oh, right. You didn't see the connection.
No,
right?
no. Because why would spasming neck and shaky fingers necessarily be connected? So no doctors knew about this thing. And when I went to the doctor to talk about my tremor, I didn't say, oh, and I've also got a crooked neck. I would say either I've got a crooked neck or I've got a tremor, if that was what I was wanting to deal with. So that's sort of why I kind of just felt like I had to live with these things.
Podcast and broadcast. This is Conversations with Richard Feidler.
So you had left journalism after a while, ended up teaching journalism in Sydney at UTS, and you've still got this mysterious tremor that people are just saying, doctors are saying it's a familial tremor, it's something that's inherited. What kind of treatments were you paying for to deal with the tremor at that time?
It was really just the self-medication of alcohol and, painkillers, especially when the neck was giving me trouble.
Was it a bit of a boiling frog situation? Was it sort of getting a little bit worse, a little bit worse, a little bit worse? Were your family noticing this and saying things to you?
What happened was I went to a neighbour's place on New Year's Eve and she said to me, I noticed that you shake a lot when I was going for a piece of cheese and a biscuit. And she said, I thought you had MS. And I was a bit taken aback. And then her partner, who was the head of radiology at St Vincent's, I said to her, what do you reckon it is? And she said, I think it's probably essential tremor. And she said, actually, there's a new treatment at St Vincent's. They've just got this new machine in and there's a doctor called Dr. Stephen Tisch. And if you're interested, you should check it out. And so the next day I said to Mum, this woman said to me last night about my tremor and, she's suggested I might have MS or something. And Mum said, well, actually, Sonya, we've all noticed that it's got worse and we think you probably should go and do something about it. And that was really the moment when I went, oh, gee, yeah, they're noticing now.
So what happened when you went in to see Dr. Tisch at St Vincent's Hospital?
Well, I sat outside his rooms and I was in some degree of fear because I thought, what if I have got MS or Parkinson's or something? Anyway, he called me into his office. I think of him a bit as a laughing man. He's got this very positive and jolly disposition despite the fact that the work that he does is very serious. And he sort of ushered me into his office and he said, how can I help you? And anyway, I said, look, I've got this tremor. It's gone to my head. It's got worse.
What do you mean it's gone to your head? Is this the neck you're talking about now? Is it right?
So what happened was my head started going like this.
Bobbing, you mean?
Bobbing, yeah.
And so what did he do then when he saw that?
Well, he said, oh, okay, well, it could be essential tremor, but let's just do a few tests. And the first thing he got me to do was put a cap on a pen holding my hands out in front of me really slowly. And to my absolute embarrassment, I could not put the cap on the pen. And of course and I don't say this in a negative way towards him, but he sort of thrilled to it because it was exactly what he needed to know. What did
he say you had?
Well, he then said, now tip your hands upside down and then back this way. And he made me do a few more hand movements. And he said, it's fluttering. He said, so it's not essential tremor, it's dystonia.
Now, what is dystonia?
That's what I said. I'd never heard of it. It's a movement disorder, and it's characterised by certain movements of your hands that are different to essential tremor.
Is it a neurological disorder?
Yes. It's the brain sending the body bad message or, faulty messages and telling it to do things. And it's very common with people who do repetitive work. So, for example, hairdressers, quite common. Musicians, it's quite common with. Golf, when people talk about golfers getting the yips, it's some form of...
Right, dystonia.
Yeah.
And journos maybe sit there banging at a keyboard?
Exactly right, yeah. Because I always noticed after an election, all my symptoms were worse.
So democracy was bad for you.
It totally was. I mean...
I'm laughing, but your dad had the tremor.
Yeah.
Is it an inheritable condition?
This is the thing. It's genetic, like many conditions. Genetics does the groundwork, and then environment does the rest.
Oh, I see.
So, firstly, I got the genes probably from Dad. Dad died, trauma. Journalism, 24/7 trauma. Just a joke, that was. And then getting older and it getting worse.
So there it is. I know it's probably medically foolish or scientifically foolish to think one thing's responsible for everything, but is it possible his heart attack was related to his condition? If he had dystonia as well, do you think he had dystonia? What do you think?
I think he probably did have dystonia, but I don't think the heart attack was related to it. I think it was related to
stress,
men living
travel,
poorly in the 70s. There was an epidemic of heart attacks at that time, apparently. And, that was before people learnt to do exercise regularly.
How much sense did that diagnosis make to you?
Utter sense. The minute he kind of did it, it was deeply relieving. And also I had tremendous confidence in Stephen Tish. Just something about him. We had a very, very strong rapport. And
why was it relieving?
Well, because I had always been hiding this thing, and I'd also partly thought that it was my fault, that I'd lived too hard or I'd done things too hard. And when I went to him and showed him, and he then said, "This is what it is," I realised, and I know this sounds kind of weird, but I thought, well, it's not my fault. I mean, maybe part of it is, but it is a genetic condition.
So you'd had a bit of shame over it.
I think so.
And I suppose that's buried in the furtiveness and the hiding of it too. That probably made it worse too, that sense of unnecessary shame.
Yeah. I mean, yes, I think that's probably true. I mean, I don't think it sort of kept me up at night. I mean, I still had and do have a very happy life, notwithstanding those challenges.
And part of you liked the bohemian life anyway.
I did.
Yeah.
But everything just clicked into place as soon as he told me what it was. And then I couldn't wait to get home and tell everyone, I've got dystonia.
Everyone,
yay!
Good news. I've got dystonia. And everyone then says, what's dystonia? So have you got a card I know people have had a condition they have to put on a card to hand out to people.
Googling it, we all were.
So being able to put a name to this thing, the first thing is you're going to want to know, well, now how do I treat it? Surely there's got to be a treatment for it. And what kind of answers did you get for that?
Well, he said there are a number of things, because I have it affecting several parts of my body, each different part of my body affected by it sort of requires a different treatment. So, for example, with the yes head tremor...
This is the nodding you have, the nod.
Yeah, where you nod. Yeah. And some people have a no. So often if you see people doing a no head tremor, which I'm doing right now, listeners, for Richard, you think, oh, that person's really negative or they don't want to help me. And now I feel really sorry for those people because I realise they often can't help it.
But you got the yes.
I got the yes. Which,
so you're too obliging. Are you?
Yeah, well, that's what my neurologist said. He said it's better than a no. And we both laughed. And do
you need a black sense of humour to be in these situations?
You certainly do. And yes, you need to be prepared to take yourself down a few pegs, I think, to be able to describe it.
So are there different kinds of dystonia then?
Yeah. There's dystonia that affects the eyelids, where people's eyelids go up and down really quickly. There's dysphonia, which affects the vocal cords and makes people have tremulous voices. And in fact, our family knows somebody who worked at the telephone exchange and so used to use her voice a lot, and she has dysphonia. So a lot of the time I think, once again, it bears out this idea that there's a sort of a repetitive movement aspect to it.
And is there a distinct name for the kind of dystonia that you have?
The neck and head is called cervical dystonia.
Cervical?
Yeah, because the cervical neck, it's a spinal...
Oh, right. It's not the cervix, in other words.
No.
I was thinking it's a long way from your cervix. Right.
I know, it's a bit of an unfortunate sort of coupling of the word, but no, it's the neck, it's related to that. And then the hand one is just called a hand tremor.
What were your treatment options then?
The first thing that Dr. Tish did was prescribe a drug called gabapentin, which is an anti-epileptic drug that reduces, tremulous sort of activity, I guess. So that was to sort of modify or help my tremor. Was
that nice once you had that?
Yeah, it felt quite good. I felt quite dopey for a while, but then, and the thing is that kind of medication, it can end up not working after a while, but it has worked for me quite well. And then there was Botox in the neck and head. So yesterday I went and had Botox in my neck and in a range of different sites in my head and shoulders. And the relief I felt was just enormous. It stopped my head being pulled again in another direction. And then there is another option, which is the new treatment. And I did have to read this out because I can never say it properly.
Is it one of those treatments you have to have written in front of you so you can pronounce it?
It's called magnetic resonance guided focused ultrasound surgery.
See, I'm not going to try and repeat that.
Yeah, I know. And the acronym I'm not even going to say because it's so ugly. So that was a radical new incisionless brain surgery where they send ultrasonic beams into your brain and they burn a section of your brain, a very, very small section.
Incisionless?
Incisionless.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a thing? You can do this now?
Yeah.
So did you say yes to this?
Not straight away. Because it's quite expensive. So at first I said, look, and so did Dr. Tish, let's just see how you go. And we did for almost a year. And then I went to him and I said, look, the tremor's getting worse. And he said, yeah, I accept that it is. And he said, I think you might be a good candidate for the aforementioned treatment. And he said, because it was COVID, there were a couple of patients who couldn't come up from Melbourne to have the treatment at the time. And he said, I've got a spot and I can get you in. So Judy and I were on holidays. I had to really, there was a lot of hand-wringing about the spend, the risk, the risks are actually very minimal. But, the kind of the concept, I had to have my head shaved completely. And after a while, I just decided that I was going to do it.
So you decided to go ahead with this option for this incisionless new form of brain surgery. How did that proceed? What's the first thing that has to happen for you to go about this?
So I had to have an MRI of my skull to make sure it wasn't too thick. And apparently it was thicker than ideal, which I was a bit offended about, but it was within the range that was made me a suitable candidate for it. And then once he established that was okay, I then had to meet with a neurosurgeon. It's a team of 3 who do it, a neurosurgeon, the neurologist himself, and a radiologist. And so I went to St Vincent's Hospital on the day that it was scheduled. And at that stage, I don't know if they still do, but they kept you in overnight because it was still relatively new in Australia. I was only the 80th person in Sydney to have it. So I went in and I was sitting in St Vincent's, sort of twiddling my thumbs, and a bloke came in and said, oh, do you know what I'm here for? And I said, I think so. And he said, I'm here to shave your head. It was one of those micro shocks where I knew I was going to get my head shaved, but the idea of him and in a hospital setting, it just wasn't very punk. So
it wasn't a nightclub.
No, I mean, there I was with sort of my hospital peas on the side,
right.
And
the scissors were clean. All of that. That's not good. So you, once they've shaved your head, what do they do with you? What do they do after that?
Well, that was the night before the procedure. So at 5 o'clock in the morning, I was wheeled down to the place where it was due to happen, the sort of radiology department, and the neurosurgeon and his assistants basically gave my head a much finer shave to the point where it was completely bald, and then they rubbed it with alcohol, which stung a bit. And then I had to have this ridiculous dome thing put on my head, which had cold or iced water in it, because they have to make sure that they protect the whole brain and just zoom in on a bit of it. And then they screwed these sort of nails into my temples and things so the thing would hold. And then I had to go and sit in the MRI machine, lie down and...
Are you doing this under a general anaesthetic?
No, I was completely awake.
Are you getting a local anaesthetic for these?
No. It was all...
So
all
it's hideously painful, is it?
Well, it just felt weird. It sounded like somebody was crunching into sand.
Right.
And...
There's a zzz sound like that kind of thing?
No, more sort of like when you're walking on sand with your shoes. Yeah, it was weird.
So this machine has to be mounted to your head, in other words?
Yeah, a dome.
Right. And that's presumably so that it can be utterly precise then. So no matter even the slightest movement won't affect the positioning
yes,
of
but
it?
also they had to keep the head cool.
Cool.
Yeah. So then they put you on you go into the MRI machine, and then the dome sort of fits into this recessed helmet, and you're sort of locked in, and you're told to be as completely still as you can. And you get a panic button too, just in case you freak out. I apparently was moving and had pressed the panic button accidentally. So they did say to me, look, if you're struggling, we can give you some fentanyl. So I said, look, can you give me some fentanyl, which they did. But I had to be relatively aware because while they were zooming in on the area that they thought it was where the tremor was being caused, I had to handwrite on a bit of paper that Dr. Tish put in front of me to see if that was the tremulous zone.
My God.
Yeah.
So they're sending... What exactly is invading the brain if it's not through an incision? What's going into the brain at this point? Is it a laser or what?
Ultrasonic rays, I think.
And so that's burning away some or destroying part?
They haven't done that yet. First, what they have to do is simulate the spot where it is. And by writing really badly, which I've always done, my handwriting's never been good. And that's another side effect of dystonia. I was writing, and and then they realised, yes, we've got the spot. And once they had the spot, they were able to then tell me. Then I lay down, and they said, "Okay, we're going to go now," and it was like a thunderbolt going through my head, but not painful, just a bit like an electric shock.
Did anything appear before your eyes during this moment?
No. Just, I think I imagined a thunderbolt.
So it was like the pure sensation, just the sensation of it?
Yeah.
Was it distressing?
No, I found it quite exciting because I think I decided as well early on that I was going to treat this as a story. So I thought, well, people have done many more dangerous things than this. And I'm a journo, so that was my way of separating myself, I guess, and, coping.
So the thunderbolt sent into your head?
Yeah. And then they went, okay, we'll just have a look. And then the ideal thing is that they want you to have the sensation of falling backwards because that means it's been really successful.
And feeling like you're falling backwards is a sign of success?
Apparently. So they had another go and I got the thunderbolt again. And I think I sort of went, oh, or something like that during the thunderbolt sensation, just because it was weird, not painful, but just a bit weird. Mm. Yeah. And then the team said, oh, do you mind if we just have one more go? And I said, no, that's fine, as well, we're here. And then they did one more go, and then I had this sensation of falling backwards, and I told them, and they said, oh, that's great.
Sonya, while you're going through this extraordinary procedure, you're feeling this thunderbolt in your head and this affected part of your brain and all that, but is there still part of you, and maybe it's the journalist part of you again, that's standing back going, oh, this is really interesting?
Yeah, totally. I found it really quite entertaining. In a way, I was a bit sorry that it was over because, especially with fentanyl, time passes very quickly. Apparently the whole thing took 3 hours. It felt like 5 minutes.
So once they've zapped the thing that they've wanted to zap, without incision. I was going to say non-invasively, but it's not quite, is it? It's without an incision.
Yeah.
Through the skull and all that. And that's completed. How did they know they'd succeeded?
Stephen Tish came up to me and said, okay, now write with your hand. And my writing was a lot better. So One of the things when you have a tremor is they ask you to draw circles, and my circles have always been serrated with the tremor, and I was able to draw sort of snail circles. I was able to draw circles within circles, and they were really neat.
And were you marvelling at that?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I was going to say it's a miracle, but it was miraculous, and it kind of did feel miraculous, partly just because of how instantaneous it was. It's not like you had to go home and, or go back to the hospital bed and sleep for a few weeks and and then you got better. You were better almost right away.
So then back in the wards, what was your first post-op meal like?
Well, it had peas. And I hadn't been able to pick up peas on a fork for decades. They didn't taste that good, but and Judy came to visit me, and I said, look, and we took a photo of me holding this thing of peas, and I just was able to put them into my mouth without spilling them.
There's a little bit of doggerel I learnt as a kid in the kids' joke book, which was, I eat my peas with honey, I've done it all my life, it makes the peas taste funny, but it keeps them on the knife.
Well, that's it.
So you're eating peas for the first time in a long while. Is your right side still steady since then?
Yes, it is. So that's my right side, and I'm showing...
No tremor at all?
No tremor. That's my left side.
But the tremor kicked in when you showed me your left hand. Then you brought up your right hand and it's steady. Then you brought up your left hand and it stops and starts.
Yeah.
Is it a fluttering tremor like that?
Yeah. And if I go like that, you'll see that. See how my little finger goes up?
Yes, your little finger.
It's a bit hard to explain to people who can't see it, but...
Can you have the same treatment for your left side?
I can, but I spoke to my neurologist about that yesterday, and a number of people have had it done. There are worries about balance. That's one of the risk factors. So even after I had my first one done, I did have some balance problems where I would sort of just be standing and could almost go to falling straight away with no warning. And luckily those things pass within about 6 weeks. But if you get the second side done, there are risks that you could get permanent damage to your ability to balance, and that's a risk I'm not prepared to take. And also, I understand that there can be side effects to the way you speak. And the neurologist said to me, look, because part of your job is public speaking, I wouldn't recommend it for you. And I don't think it's worth it in my case.
You had the therapy done to do more than just eat peas for the first time. How has it changed your life?
Oh, a lot. I can carry a glass across a room without being embarrassed or sensitive or worried that I'm going to drop it. I can use chopsticks again. I couldn't, I'd learnt to use chopsticks from quite a young age, and then I couldn't use them anymore. Now I can use them. It enables me to do a lot of, not completely fine motor, but more fine motor skill-related things than I could before.
Has it affected your sense of touch?
No, but I had to learn to type again. That was interesting. And I was worried at first that, what if I can't type? But I could. I just had to sort of relearn that.
How do you feel about identifying as a disabled person or a person with a disability? Because you clearly are, but are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, I am. I mean, people have asked me this question before, and I happily sign up to living with a disability, but like with a lot of things, and it is a cliche, but I really don't want to be labelled any one thing, whether it's related to sexuality or cultural background or disability or ability. I think I think people are so many things that I don't want to be just one thing.
You're Sonya Voumard, an author, a former journalist, and a person who eats peas with her right hand. Will you cop to that?
I think that's hilarious. Thank you.
Has this made you feel, somewhat closer to your father? Do you think about what had happened to your father if he hadn't died of a heart attack? And he
often, yeah, we all do. Yes, we absolutely all do. What's interesting is that somebody contacted me after I wrote the book, and it turned out that Dad had a cousin who I didn't know existed, and she had trained as a classical musician, and she said, look, I was given this book, and I've just been diagnosed with dystonia, and when I started reading it, I recognised so many things in it. I realised that we're probably related. And so we're in touch as a result. So that's a kind of a strange, I suppose, reconnection to my father's history that has been interesting. But yeah, I mean, we often wonder what it would have been like, you know, for Dad to have lived long enough to be a grandfather and to have remained Mum's partner and so on.
It seems to me the treatment has been so massive to you, but the way you're telling it to me, it seems to me like the most important thing to you is the diagnosis. The diagnosis, just having the truth of it. Having the truth of it rather than suspicions and misunderstandings and all of that. Has that brought a kind of a settledness to your life, having the science of what's happened to you much better understood now?
Very much so, yeah. And so, for example, when I came in here today, I thought, oh, God, I'm going to shake. And then I thought, it doesn't matter because that's what I'm here for.
Yeah. It's been a great pleasure speaking with you and hearing about this extraordinary journey you've been on, Sonya. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's been so much fun.
Sonya Voumard's memoir is called Tremor, a movement disorder in a disordered world. Today's conversation was produced on the lands of the Gadigal people. Producer was Maggie Morris. Executive producer was Nicola Harrison. I'm Richard Feidler. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to a podcast of Conversations with Richard Feidler. For more Conversations interviews, please go to the website abc.net.au/conversations.